"Step back from the door," I said, and I said it once, the way I have learned to say the things that matter level, low, without heat. And the man in the silver-gray coat smiled at me as though I had told him a joke he had heard before. He was not the first to smile. In 19 years standing the doors of Harrowgate Palace, I have watched a great many people decide that I was furniture. A man who does not move, who does not turn his head, who answers nothing, becomes in their minds a part of the wall, and walls do not need to be reckoned with. You can lean on a wall. You can rap your knuckles on a wall and feel clever. So the man in the silver-gray coat rapped his knuckles, not on the wall, but on the breast of my tunic twice light, the way you might tap a vending machine that has eaten your coin, and he kept smiling while he did it. "You don't understand who I am," he said. "I understand exactly who you are," I told him. "You are a man standing in front of a door he is not going to open. Step back." His name, I would learn before the night was finished, was Corwin Vale, and the credentials in the inner pocket of that beautiful coat were as fine a forgery as I have ever held in my gloved hand, heavy stock, the controller's wax seal pressed clean and deep, a ribbon the exact dyed crimson the household uses and not one shade off. Everything about him had been made to pass. He had been made to pass. He stood a head shorter than me, and he carried himself a head taller, and he had the particular ease of a man who has spent his whole life being waved through doors by people too polite, or too frightened, or too dazzled to ask him to stop. I am not any of those three things. The palace does not pay me to be polite at this door. It pays me to be the last thing that goes wrong before the alarm. Let me set the place for you, because the place is half the story. The door behind me was the door to the cold gallery, and through the cold gallery, and through the cold gallery only, lay the private wing of Her Majesty Queen Saraland of the Royal House of Harrowgate, her study, her writing room, the nursery corridor where Princess Malin and Prince Joran slept under the watch of their nurses, and that night, the small green room where the Queen herself had withdrawn an hour before with a headache, and the locked dispatch box that 3 ministers had been arguing over since noon. The cold gallery is the throat of the private wing. There is no other way, and that does not first pass a man at this door. I was the man at this door. My name is Sergeant Tomas Reade, and I have stood this post, or posts like it, since I was 22 years old. It was the night of the midsummer reception, which matters, because on the night of the midsummer reception the palace fills up with people who have every right to be in it, and 100 who have only the right to be in part of it. And the whole art of my trade collapses down to one hard, narrow question, asked over and over until the small hours. Asterisk not who are you, but where are you allowed to be? The state rooms blazed 3 corridors behind us. I could hear the string ensemble through the stone, the low surf of 400 voices, the clink of the long tables. Down here, past the velvet rope and the brass stand that says private no admittance, it was quiet and it was cold, which is how the gallery earned its name. The cold is the river. The river runs under this side of the palace, close to the old foundations, and it keeps these stones at the temperature of a cellar even in midsummer, even when the rooms above are sweating under the chandeliers. My breath did not show quite, but it wanted to. Corwin Vale had come down the service stair from the direction of the kitchens, which was the first wrong thing, because a man with a real summons from the controller does not come up from the kitchens. He comes down the long stair with a footman ahead of him. He had come quietly, which was the second wrong thing, because a real summons is a noisy business. There are forms. There is a runner sent ahead. There is a name written in the night book at the head of the stair. No name had been written. I knew, because I had stood the head of that stair myself for the first 2 hours of the watch before Corporal Aldous spelled me down to the gallery door. And I have a memory for the night book that has frightened more than one young officer who hoped I had not been paying attention. So when the man in the silver-gray coat came out of the dark of the service passage and walked toward me with that easy stride, I had already, in the quiet arithmetic that runs under everything I do at this post, begun to add him up, and the sum was coming out wrong. "I'm here for the dispatch box," he said, as though that explained the kitchens, the silence, the empty page in the book. He drew the credentials out and held them up at my eye level close. The wax seal turned to catch the lamplight. "Controller's authority. The box is to be carried to the muniment room for the night under seal, and I'm the man who carries it. You'll have had word." "I've had no word," I said. "Then your word is late." He let a little iron into the smile now. "It happens. The controller's office runs on its own clock, Sergeant, and it does not always trouble to wind yours. The box, please, through the door." "No one carries anything through this door tonight," I said, "that I have not had named to me from the head of the stair in the book by an officer I know. That is not your office's clock. That is mine. Step back." I want to be careful, telling this, not to make myself out as a man who knew at once. I did not know at once. What I had at that moment was not knowledge. It was a feeling along the back of the neck, the same feeling I had the night a fire started in the old laundry, and the same feeling I had, years before that, on a road in a country I will not name, the night the men in the truck ahead of mine decided to stop. It is the feeling that the shape of the ordinary has gone slightly out of true, the way a picture hung a degree off level will nag at you across a room before you understand what you are looking at. The kitchens were out of true. The silence was out of true. The seal in his glove was perfect, and the perfection of it was, somehow, the most out of true thing of all, because the real household seals are never quite this clean. They go to 100 doors a week and they wear. So I did not draw a conclusion. I did the only thing a man in my place is ever entitled to do on a feeling. I held the line, and I gave the warning, and I waited to see what the warning would do to him. Because what a man does when he is told no asterisk at a door is, in my experience, the truest credential he carries. A real controller's man told he had been missed in the book would have been irritated, and his irritation would have pointed asterisk upward at the office that failed to send word, at the clerk who failed to write the name. He would have wanted to fix the paperwork. He would have said, asterisk fine, send a runner, wake the duty officer, let's get this sorted, I haven't got all night. He would have been, in a word, on my side of the problem because the paperwork is his shield too. Corwin Vale was not irritated upward. His irritation pointed at asterisk me asterisk. He wanted the door, not the runner. And when I said step back the second time, he did not reach for the night book or the duty officer or the telephone on the wall 10 feet to his left. He reached very slightly for the inside of his coat. I do not carry a rifle at the gallery door. The men at the public gates carry the long arms, the ceremonial weight of them part of the show, the brass and the polish and the bayonet that the tourists photograph. Down here in the throat of the private wing, we carry the short discipline, a baton, a holstered sidearm I have drawn exactly twice in 19 years and fired never, a whistle on a chain, and the radio. The radio was the most dangerous thing on my belt, and Corwin Vale did not know it. He had reckoned with the door and reckoned with me, and he had reckoned, I think, that a man alone at a quiet door in the small hours is a man who can be handled, talked past, leaned on, frightened, or, if all of that failed, moved. He had not reckoned with the fact that I was not alone. I was the visible end of a thing that ran all the way up to the roof of the palace and out into the city, and the moment I judged it true, I could light the whole of it with one word. But not yet. A word like that, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. On the night of the midsummer reception, with 400 guests 3/4 away and the Queen withdrawn with a headache and 2 children asleep down the nursery hall, the cost of crying wolf is not embarrassment. The cost is a stampede in the state rooms, a panic on the stairs, 100 ways for an old man to be knocked down, and 100 ways for a frightened crowd to do, in 3 minutes, more harm than any one intruder could do in an hour. I have seen a false alarm kill a man. I will not be the cause of one. So I watched his hand go toward the coat, and I let my own right hand come off the small of my back and rest, open, easy, at my side, not on the holster, just nearer to it than it had been, and I said the third thing, and the third thing was not a warning. The warnings were finished. "If your hand comes out of that coat with anything in it but empty fingers," I said, "you and I are going to have a very bad night, and only one of us is going to have a worse morning. Show me your hand." He stopped. I will tell you exactly what stopped him, because it was not me, not the size of me, not the level voice. What stopped Corwin Vale was that he heard in that sentence a man who had decided. Most people he had ever pushed against gave him, in the moment of pushing, some small flicker of asterisk, give a glance away, a swallow, a half-step, the body's honest confession that it would rather not. He got none of it from me, and a man like Vale lives or dies by reading that flicker, and its absence is a colder thing than any threat, because a threat is a transaction and you can bargain with a transaction. But a decided man is a wall you have just discovered is load-bearing, and you do not lean on it twice. His hand came out slowly, empty. He turned the palm up and out, a small theatrical surrender, fingers spread. "Easy, Sergeant," he said. The smile was working hard now. "There's no need for any of that. I only meant to show you the warrant proper. There's a second page, the office copy. It's in the lining." He patted the coat where his hand had gone, gently, with the flat of his fingers, the way you reassure a nervous animal. "We've started off wrong. Let me start again. I have a great deal of respect for men who take their duty seriously. It's rare. It's admirable. The controller will hear how careful you were. He'll want your name." "Reade," I said. "He's welcome to it. He can ask me for it himself by daylight with the duty officer standing next to me and the book open. Until then this door is shut and you are leaving the way you came, up the service stair. Now." It is worth saying that everything Vale did next he did well. He did not bluster. Blustering is what the amateurs do, the entitled guests and the drunk lords. The men who think volume is the same thing as authority. I have stood through 1,000 hours of bluster, and it falls off me like rain off slate. Vale did the opposite. He grew quiet and reasonable and warm, and he began to build me a little room to lose in, a place where saying yes would feel not like surrender but like sense. "Let me be honest with you," Reade, soldier to soldier. He had clocked something in how I stood, the way old service stands in a man's spine whether he wills it or not, and he was using it. "This is above both of us. There's been a wrangle all day over that box. You'll have felt the temperature of it, the ministers in and out. The controller wants it moved tonight, under his own seal, asterisk before the morning, for reasons that are frankly none of our business and entirely his right. He sent me down the back way precisely so it wouldn't become a scene at the head of the stair, with 3 deputy ministers watching to see whose man got the box. Discretion, Sergeant. The thing you and I both serve. If you make me go back up there and fetch the duty officer and turn this into a procession, you will have done exactly the thing the controller sent me to prevent. You'll have made the scene, and the men above you do not love the soldier who makes the scene." It was good. I want you to understand how good it was. He had taken the very instinct that should have stopped him. This is irregular. This should be done in the open, and turned it inside out, so that doing it in the open became the failure and the dark service stare became the discretion. He had made my caution into the danger. He had even flattered my service and threatened my career in the same breath, the carrot and the knife laid side by side on the table where I could see them both. A younger man, a tired man, a man who wanted to go home, might have looked at that table and decided that the small wrong of opening one door was less than the large wrong of making the scene. That is the trap, the reasonable-sounding middle, the thing that is almost right. But I have a rule, and the rule has kept me at this work for 19 years where better-liked men washed out in 5, and the rule is this: the door does not move for a story. It moves for the book, the officer, the named summons, the daylight. It does not move for charm. It does not move for threat. And above all, it does not move for a story that explains why the book and the officer and the daylight can, just this once, be skipped. The better the story, the harder I hold. Because the only people who need a beautiful story to get through a door are the people who cannot get through it any other way. That's a fine speech, I said. Here's mine. I've nothing to settle with the controller and nothing to fear from him, because by the time he hears my name I'll have done my job exactly as he'd want it done if he were standing here. The box stays. You go. And whether you go up that stair on your own feet in the next 10 seconds or you go in front of an officer with your wrists in plastic is the only choice left on the table. I'd take the stair. For 1 second, the warmth went out of his face entirely and I saw what was underneath it. And what was underneath it was not a courtier and was not a clerk. It was a workman looking at a job that had gone wrong, calculating. And then the warmth came back, smooth as a curtain drawn across a window, and he said, "All right, Sergeant, all right. You've made your point." He took a step back toward the dark mouth of the service passage, both hands raised, rueful, beaten. And as he stepped back, his eyes went, just for an instant, he could not help it, past my shoulder to the door. Not to me, to the door. The way a man looks at the thing he has not given up on. That was when I knew, not suspected, knew, and that was when I lifted the radio. I did not shout into it. There is a way of speaking on a palace radio on the night of a great reception that says "come now" without saying *emergency*, because the difference between those two words is the difference between a quiet thing handled and 400 people running for the doors. We are trained in it the way singers are trained in breath. You give the post, you give the color, and the color does the work. There are colors that mean a guest has fainted, and colors that mean a fire, and colors that, spoken in a flat, steady voice from the gallery door, will turn the whole machine of the palace toward you like a head turning toward a sound in the dark. "Gallery door, Reade," I said into it, my eyes on Vale, my voice no louder than the words I had been speaking to him. Amber at the throat. One subject, male, gray coat, Southern Service stare, hold the house. Nobody moves. Amber at the throat. The throat is the cold gallery. Amber is the color that is not yet red, a wrong at the door of the private wing, contained. A man wanted at it now and quietly. The stairs sealed, but the music left playing so the guests upstairs never know the floor has shifted beneath them. Hold the house meant the doors I could not see were being closed by men I trusted in the same breath I was speaking. From the moment those 4 short clauses left my mouth, the palace I stood in was no longer a building full of strangers. It was a fist, and I was the knuckle, and it was closing. Corwin Vale heard every word. Of course he did. I made no secret of it. I wanted him to hear, because the radio was also a warning, the last and largest of all my warnings, and a warning is only mercy if the man can still choose to heed it. "This is your moment," the radio said to him as plainly as my voice had. "The house is awake now. You cannot win the door. Sit down on that stair with your hands where I can see them, and the worst thing that happens to you tonight is a long conversation in a small room. Or move and find out what the color amber turns into." He did not sit down. I have thought about that a great deal since, why he did not. A clever man, and Vale was clever, hears the radio and knows the arithmetic has changed and folds, because a clever man is playing the percentages, and the percentages have just collapsed. But Vale, I came to understand, was not only playing percentages. He was a man on a contract, and the contract was the box, and somewhere above him in a chain I would spend the next weeks pulling apart there was a person to whom Vale answered, a person who frightened Vale more than I did, and the math that ran behind his eyes in that instant was not "can I get the box," but "what happens to me if I come back without it?" When a man fears the one who sent him more than he fears the one in front of him, the warning loses its grip, and you are no longer dealing with a thief. You are dealing with a desperate man, which is a worse and more dangerous animal, and the rules of the encounter change. He moved. Not toward me, he was not a fool, and I outweighed him and outreached him, and he had felt the decision in me. He moved past me, fast, a sidestep and a lunge for the gap between my shoulder and the door frame, betting everything on the one thing he could not have known and could not have stopped, that the door behind me was unlocked. It was unlocked. On the night of the reception, with the Queen withdrawn and her staff carrying trays in and out, the cold gallery door is not bolted. Bolting it would trap her people on the wrong side of it. It was a door that could be opened with a hand. And Vale's hand reached it. His fingers actually closed on the cold brass of the handle. I heard the latch tongue click as it began to give before mine closed on his collar. I did not hit him. I want that on the record because the easy version of this story, the version a man tells in a pub, is the one where the guard lays the intruder flat with one blow, and it is a lie, and it is the wrong lesson. There was a child asleep 40 feet beyond that door and a queen with a headache 30 feet beyond that, and the last thing either of them needed was a brawl spilling through the threshold. The power of my post is not in the blow. It is in the asterisk stop. I took him by the collar and the wrist in the 2 grips they teach you in the first month and never let you forget, and I did not strike him and I did not throw him. I turned his own lunge into the wall, used the speed he had brought, and pinned him there against the cold stone beside the door with his cheek to the rock, and his arm folded up behind him exactly far enough to make moving a thing he would not choose to do, and not 1 degree farther. The door swung an inch open behind us, then drifted shut on its own weight, the latch finding home with a small final click. No one beyond it ever stirred. "Don't," I said, close to his ear, and for the first time all night there was something under the level of my voice, not anger. I am too old for anger at a post, but a kind of grief, because I knew now what he was and I knew what came next for him, and there is no satisfaction in it. Don't make it worse. It's done. Be still. He was not still. He bucked once hard, the desperate animal in him still doing its sums, and when the buck failed, he did the thing I had been most afraid of all along. He got his free hand into the coat, not for a weapon as it turned out, for the box's twin. There was, sewn into the lining of that beautiful silver gray coat, a flat case the size and shape of the dispatch box's contents, lined in the same crimson, sealed with the same wax, and his whole desperate animal purpose in that last second was not to take the real box out, but to leave the false 1 asterisk in, to drop it through the inch of open door before it closed. So that when the dust settled there would be a sealed controller's case lying on the floor of the private wing, and a story to go with it, his story, the one where he had been admitted and had done his lawful errand, and the brutal sergeant had assaulted a credentialed officer for no cause at all. He was not trying to win the door anymore. He was trying to lose it in a way that ruined me. He very nearly managed it. The latch had already clicked shut. The case struck the closed door and slid to the floor of the gallery at our feet, on my side of the threshold in the open, where 40 feet away footsteps were already coming fast down the stone, Aldous, and behind Aldous the duty officer, and behind them the whole closing fist of the house. The case lay there on the cold flags between us, sealed, crimson, perfect, a forgery good enough to hang a man, and I understood in that instant that the night was not going to be settled by who held the door. It was going to be settled by whose story the morning believed. Corporal Aldous reached us first. He is a wide, unhurried man of about 30, slow to speak and slower to be surprised, and the best pair of hands in the wing precisely because nothing makes them shake. He took one look at the shape of things, me at the wall, the man pinned, the sealed case lying loose on the flags, and he did not ask a single question. He produced the plastic restraints, and at my nod he secured Vale's wrists, and only when the man was bound did Aldous bend and look at the case on the floor without touching it. "That's a controller's seal," Aldous said quietly. It was not a challenge. It was a fact, laid down between us like a card turned face up, and we both knew what the fact would do upstairs. "It's a forgery," I said. "So are the credentials in his coat." He came up the Southern Service stair with no name in the book, and tried to take the dispatch box out of the private wing on the strength of a warrant nobody sent. "That," said Corwin Vale, his cheek still to the stone, his voice astonishingly composed for a man with his arm folded behind him, "is a lie this sergeant will be made to answer for. I am Crown Auditor Corwin Vale, seconded to the Controller's office, and I was admitted to this corridor on lawful business by this man, who then assaulted me when I declined to let him examine documents above his clearance. I have my warrant. I have my second warrant on the floor, which he knocked from my hand. And I have, gentlemen, a great many friends who will be extremely interested to learn how a Queen's private wing is guarded by a man who attacks credentialed officers in the dark. It was, I will grant him, magnificent. He had been bound, beaten at the door, and exposed, and within 90 seconds he had rebuilt the whole burning house of his story on new ground and moved into it. And the terrible thing, the thing that turned my stomach as the duty officer's footsteps came down the gallery, was that on the bare facts, stripped of the feeling that had told me he was wrong, his story fit too. There was a credentialed-looking man. There was a sealed-looking warrant on the floor. There was a guard who had laid hands on him. A stranger to this corridor, hearing both accounts cold, would have at best a coin to flip, and the people who would judge it were not strangers to power. Some of them, I would learn, were strangers to nothing. Captain Hollis arrived at the run, which told me she had taken Amber at the throat exactly as gravely as I had meant it. She is the duty officer of the inner watch, a lean, exact woman who came up through the same hard schools I did and trusts the radio discipline of her sergeants the way you trust a rope you have tied yourself. She stopped 3 feet short of us, took in the scene the way Aldous had the wall, the bindings, the case, and then did the single most important thing anyone did all night. She did nothing hasty. "Sergeant Reade," she said. "Report." Subject approached the gallery door from the Southern Service stair. No entry in the night book at the head of the stair. Time roughly 0140, I said. The words came out flat and ordered, the way they are supposed to, because the report is the spine of everything, and a wobble in the report is a wobble in the wall. Presented controller's credentials, and demanded the dispatch box for removal to the muniment room under seal. I had received no notice of any such removal through any channel. I warned him twice to withdraw. He declined. He attempted to pass me through the door by force. I restrained him without strike. During the restraint he attempted to introduce that sealed case onto the gallery floor on this side of the threshold. I assessed the credentials and the case as forgeries. I called Amber and held the door. Door was not breached. Private wing not entered. Her Majesty and the household not disturbed. "You assess them as forgeries," Hollis repeated, and there was nothing in it but the need to be sure. "On what?" "On the seal," I said. "It's too clean. And on the stair and the silence and the book and on this." I told her about his eyes going to the door over my shoulder as he pretended to retreat, the one tell he could not govern, the look a man gives the thing he has not given up on. It is thin in the telling. I knew it was thin. A captain cannot bind a man on the strength of a sergeant's read of an eye flick. But Hollis had stood doors herself, and she knew that the eye flick is real even when it will not stand up in a room full of clerks, and I watched her file it where it belonged, not as proof, but as the thing that makes you keep looking until you find the proof. "Crown Auditor Vale," Hollis said, turning to him, and she gave him the title, which was correct, because until a forgery is proven it is only an accusation, and an officer of the inner watch does not prejudge. "You'll understand that 2 sealed warrants and an arrest in the private wing is a matter that goes above my watch. You'll be held, not charged, held in the steward's anteroom under guard while the seals are verified, and the controller's office is woken to confirm or deny you. If you are who you say, you will have an apology from me personally and the sergeant's conduct will be reviewed. If you are not, you already know what you are." She nodded to Aldous. "Anteroom, 2 on the door. Nobody from outside the watch speaks to him, and he speaks to nobody until I say." And here came the first turn of the screw, the first of the tears, the first sign that this was not going to be the clean small thing I had thought I was handling. Because as Aldous drew Vale upright off the wall, the man did not look at me, and he did not look at Hollis. He looked up at the gallery's high windows, where the lights of the state rooms threw a faint glow against the night, and he smiled, a small private smile, the smile of a man who has lost a hand but is holding cards I had not yet seen, And he said to no one to the ceiling, to the great house above us. They'll send someone better than a sergeant. He was right. Within the hour they did. The someone better arrived in the person of the deputy chamberlain, the Honorable Edric Thorne, and he came down to the cold gallery not by the service stair, but by the long stair, in full evening dress, with a footman ahead of him carrying a lamp, which is exactly how a man with real authority moves through this house, and exactly the contrast Vale had wanted me to feel. Thorne is one of the great fixtures of Harrowgate, a man who has served 3 reigns' worth of administration and outlasted every minister who ever underestimated him. He is silver-haired, beautifully spoken, unfailingly courteous, and he has the particular gift of making you feel, while he disagrees with you, that he is on your side and merely sorry about the weather. I had crossed his path a dozen times in 19 years and never once seen him hurry. He was not hurrying now. But he had come down himself, at 2 in the morning, in the middle of the Queen's reception, which a man like Thorne does not do for a sergeant's misunderstanding. "Reade," he said, as though we were old friends meeting at a club, "what a wretched business. Walk with me a moment, away from the—" he gestured delicately at Aldous, and the bound man being led off toward the anteroom, the asterisk theater of it. "I'd rather hold my post, sir," I said. "Your post is held. I've 2 of the captain's men on this door as we speak. You can see them. Indulge me. I'm an old man and the river makes this gallery cold, and I'd like to understand what's happened before it becomes something none of us can put back." He had already begun to walk slowly toward the warmer end of the gallery, and a man does not refuse to walk 3 steps beside the deputy chamberlain without making a far larger scene than walking. So I walked. And as we walked, away from the others, his voice came down to something low and confidential and kind. "Here is my difficulty, Reade, and I'll be honest with you because I think you're a serious man and serious men deserve the truth. Crown Auditor Vale is known to this house. I have seen his name on a dozen quiet matters this past year. The Controller's office asterisk does move boxes at night, more than you'd like, and not always with the courtesy of a runner. It's a sloppy office, and it has been for a decade, and half my life is spent cleaning up after its sloppiness. So when you tell me there was no name in the book, I'm afraid you tell me something I hear once a month. It is not, by itself, the smoking gun you take it for." "It isn't by itself," I said. "It's with the stare, and the silence, and the seal, and the false case." "The false case." He said it gently, as though humoring a child's word for a thing. "You assess it as false. You, a man of great experience at a door, I don't doubt it, but a man who has, forgive me, never in his life examined a controller's seal under glass, never sat the office that issues them, never been trained to tell a true wax from a false. You felt it was too clean. Reade, listen to me, because I am trying to save you. You cannot hang a man's career, or risk Her Majesty's, on a feeling that a seal was too clean. If you are right, the seals will prove you right within the hour, and you will be a hero, and I will say so loudly. But if you are wrong, if Vale is exactly the tired, irregular, lawful auditor he claims, and you have pinned him to a wall in the Queen's private wing on the night of the midsummer reception over a asterisk clean seal, then it is not only you who falls. It is the watch. It is the captain who trusted your amber. It is the trust the whole household places in the men at the doors, which is a fragile and a precious thing, and which I have spent 30 years protecting. Do you see my position?" I saw it. I saw it very clearly, and it was a more dangerous trap than anything Vale had built, because it was true. Every word of it was true. The Controller's office was asterisk sloppy. I had never examined a seal under glass. A feeling is a thin rope to hang a career on. Edric Thorne had taken the strongest things I had and turned each of them, with that beautiful courteous voice, into the very reason I should doubt myself. And he had wrapped the whole thing in concern for me, for the watch, for the captain, so that holding my line now felt not like duty but like vanity, like a stubborn man refusing to admit he might have made a terrible mistake at the worst possible moment. And here is the thing I have not yet told you. the thing I did not let cross my face as I walked beside him in the cold. I did not know, in that moment, whether Edric Thorne was the most reasonable man in the palace or the second most dangerous. Because everything he said would be exactly what he would say if he were a wise old steward saving a fool sergeant from himself, and it would be exactly what he would say if he were the person above Vale in the chain. The man Vale feared, the hand that sent the box. I had no proof of that. I want to be careful. I had less than the eye flick. I had only the cold arithmetic that had run under everything since the kitchens, that a forgery this good is not the work of one man in a gray coat, that the seal that was too clean had to be copied from a real one, which means access to a real one, that the night of the reception, when the house is full and the book is busy, and a man can be slid down a service stair, is precisely the night a person inside the household would choose. And that the speed with which someone better had come down the long stair to talk me out of my certainty was either the speed of a good steward protecting his house or the speed of a frightened man protecting himself. And from where I stood in the cold at 2 in the morning, the two looked identical. So I did the only thing a man can do when he cannot tell the wise voice from the dangerous one. I did not argue with the voice. I went back to the door. "You may well be right about all of it, sir," I said, and I meant it. That was what made it strong. "I'm not too proud to be wrong about a seal, so let's prove it the one way that can't be argued with. Wake the controller, the man himself, not his office, not a clerk who might be on the wrong side of a sloppy desk, and let Asterisk him tell Captain Hollies, in his own voice, whether he sent a Crown Auditor named Corwin Vale down the Southern Service stair tonight to remove a sealed dispatch box from Her Majesty's private wing. If he says yes, I'll stand in front of Vale and apologize with the whole watch watching, and you can have my stripes if you want them. If he says no, then we're none of us talking about a clean seal anymore. Either way, the door stays shut until he speaks. I'll hold it. You wake him." For just a moment so brief I have wondered since whether I imagined it, the courtesy on Edric Thorne's face did not change at all, and that was the tell. Because a wise steward offered the clean proof that would end the matter is Asterisk relieved. He says Asterisk yes, of course, at once. Why didn't I think of it? He reaches for the telephone himself. Edric Thorne offered the one thing that would settle everything in an hour, did not reach for the telephone. He hesitated. "The controller," he said smoothly, "is unwell and not to be woken before morning, but in the morning." "Then we'll have a long cold night together, sir," I said, "and the door will be exactly as shut at dawn as it is now. I'll send for tea." He left me at the door. He did not leave the gallery. He went to the warm end and sat in a window seat with his footman and his lamp, and he watched me, and I watched the dark mouth of the service stair. And for a while the only sounds were the river under the stones and, very faint, 3 corridors off, the string ensemble still sawing away at something gentle for the 400 who did not know that anything had happened at all. I want to tell you what it costs to hold a door against a man like Thorne, because the holding is the whole of my trade, and nobody who has not done it understands that the hard part is not the lunge in the dark. The lunge in the dark is easy. The body knows what to do with a lunge. 19 years and the 2 grips and it is over before you have thought about it. The hard part is the window seat. The hard part is the long cold hours after the action, when the man with the beautiful voice and the silver hair sits 10 feet away being reasonable, and the doubt he planted in you begins to grow in the dark the way doubt does, and you start, against your will, to argue his case for him inside your own head. What if the seal really is just clean? What if the office really is that sloppy? What if you have, this once after 19 good years, got it wrong on the worst possible night, and tomorrow they will say old Reade finally cracked, saw a thief in a tired clerk, manhandled a Crown Auditor in the Queen's own wing? That voice is louder at 3 in the morning than at any other hour God made. Holding the door against the lunge takes a second. Holding it against that voice takes the whole night, and it is the only thing I have ever been truly good at. I learned it, if you want to know, on a road I have already half told you about, in a country I will not name, when I was 23 and a soldier and not yet a guard. There was a checkpoint, and a man in a good car with good papers and a great deal of charm, and a very great deal of reasonable, urgent argument about why he needed to be let through now, tonight, because of a sick mother, because of a dignitary waiting, because of 100 reasonable things, and the corporal beside me, who was kind and tired and wanted to go home, believed the reasonable things, and waved the good car through against the standing order. And the standing order had been written because of exactly that car. I will not tell you what was in it. It is enough to say that the order existed because someone wiser than the corporal had foreseen the reasonable man with the good papers, and that the corporal's kindness cost more lives than I have fingers, and that I have stood at every door since with the absolute knowledge that the reasonable urgent story is the weapon, that the rules at a threshold are not bureaucracy, but the distilled memory of every time a kind, tired man got it wrong, and that the moment you let a beautiful story move a door. You have not been generous. You have been used. I came home from that war and I took up the doors of a palace, and I have never once in 19 years let the window seat win. I was not going to start tonight. It was somewhere in the third cold hour that the night changed character, and it changed because of a sound I should not have heard. Footsteps came down the southern service stair again. The same dark mouth veil had come from, but lighter, quicker, and stopping short of the lamplight, hanging back in the dark where the watcher thinks he cannot be seen. I did not turn my head. I have a trick for the service stair. There is a brass sconce on the far wall, dull but not dead, and in its faint curve you can see, smeared and small, whatever moves at the foot of the stair. In the brass I saw a figure stop, look at me, look at the two of Hollies's men on the door, look. And this is the thing that changed everything at Thorne * in his window seat. And I saw Thorne, who did not know I could see him in the brass, lift one hand a few inches off his knee in a small flat gesture that meant, in any language, in any house, in any age of the world, not yet. Hold. He was signaling. The deputy chamberlain of Harrowgate Palace, who had come down at 2 in the morning to talk me gently out of my certainty, was signaling to a second man in the dark of the service stair, and the gesture he made was the gesture of a man running an operation, not a man cleaning up a misunderstanding. In that instant, the last of the window seat's voice went silent in me, and the cold certainty I had carried since the kitchen settled into something I could have rested a building on. I was not wrong about the seal. I had never been wrong about the seal. Edric Thorne was the hand that sent the box, and Vale was his instrument, and the whole reasonable performance of the last 3 hours had been one thing only. A man buying time, holding his second piece in the dark, waiting for the moment the watch's attention slipped so the box could be tried for a second time by a fresh hand, while the first was safely *held, not charged in an anteroom that Thorne, as deputy chamberlain, could walk into whenever he pleased. And I understood, with a coldness that had nothing to do with the river, that I had made a mistake after all, not the mistake Thorne wanted me to fear, but its opposite. I had given Vale to the anteroom and trusted the house to hold him, but the house was not whole. There was a hole in it shaped exactly like Edric Thorne, and through that hole anything could pass. A key, a word to the 2 guards that they should * take a turn outside, I'll sit with the prisoner, * a quiet untying, a quieter exit by the very service stair I was guarding the wrong end of. The danger was no longer at my door. It was behind me, in a warm anteroom, in the hands of the most trusted man in the wing. And I was the only person in the palace who knew it, and I could not prove it, and the one man I would have to convince was the man I could least afford to let see that I knew. I had to get a message to Captain Hollies. I had to get it past Thorne, and I had to do it without taking one step from the door I had sworn would not move, because the moment I left this threshold to chase the danger behind me, I would hand Thorne the open door he had wanted all along. This is the part of the night I am proudest of, and it is the part with no blow in it at all. I had the radio, but the radio was no good to me now. because Thorne could hear it, and a clear-voiced warning to Hollies about the deputy chamberlain, spoken aloud in this gallery, would do one of two things. It would make Thorne move at once before Hollies could act, or it would make me sound, to anyone who arrived after, exactly like the cracked old sergeant he had been preparing them to expect. And now he accuses the deputy chamberlain himself. You see how far gone he is. I needed a message that Thorne could watch me send and not understand, and that Hollies would understand at once. We have such a thing. I told you the radio discipline of this house is a language. What I did not tell you is that the language has a grammar below the colors, an older grammar, from the years when the inner watch worked without radios at all, that the sergeants and the captains still teach each other in the long, dull hours because the old hands believe, rightly, as it turned out, that any signal a stranger can hear is a signal a stranger can someday turn. There is a way of calling a post check, a routine thing, the most boring transmission in the house, the kind of call that makes a listening enemy relax because it is so plainly nothing. And there is a way of asterisk salting a post check, of putting a single wrong number in the sequence of posts you name, so that to any ear it is a tired sergeant running his rounds at 3 in the morning, and to the captain who tied the rope with you it is a flare going up. The wrong number tells her the trouble is not where I am calling from. The trouble is the post I named that I have no business naming. Look there. Quietly. So I lifted the radio slow and bored, the way you do at 3 in the morning, and I ran a post-check gallery door, river stair, the head of the long stair, the muniment passage, the dullest list in the world, and Thorne in his window seat, who knew the colors but had never sat the watch and so did not know the old grammar under them, listened and was reassured, because a man running routine post-checks is a man who has settled, a man whose certainty is wearing thin, a man at last becoming reasonable. And into that dull list, in the place where the muniment passage should have come, I named the steward's anteroom, a post no sergeant checks, a post that is not on any round, a single wrong number dropped into the sequence like a stone into a still pond. The trouble is the anteroom. Look there quietly. There was a half-second of silence on the channel. Then Captain Hollies' voice came back, flat and bored and perfect, acknowledging a routine post-check from a tired sergeant, and in the flatness of it I heard her understand me completely, and I could have wept because the rope held. She did not come running. She did not raise the color. She acknowledged, signed off, and somewhere above and behind me in the great quiet house she began, I knew, to move toward the anteroom the way she had moved toward me at the throat, gravely, without haste, without a sound. And Edric Thorne, 10 feet away in his window seat, settled deeper into his certainty that the old sergeant was breaking, and lifted his hand once more to the dark of the stair, asterisk not yet, hold, and I let him, because every minute he believed he was winning was a minute Hollies was reaching the anteroom, and the whole of my work now was to keep losing convincingly. So I gave him the performance of a man cracking. I let my shoulders come down a degree. I shifted my weight, the small fidget of a man whose feet hurt and whose faith is failing. When Thorne rose from the window seat and came back to me, gentle, paternal, to try once more, Reade, you've made your point and made it well. No one will say you didn't hold, but a man can hold too long, and there's no shame in a careful officer accepting that he's done his part and letting wiser heads carry it from here. I let him see me waver. I said low, as though it cost me, maybe you're right, sir. It's been a long watch. I let him have it. I watched the satisfaction move behind his courteous eyes, the satisfaction of a man who has talked harder men than me through harder doors than this, and I hated him for it. And I held the hate the way I hold everything, behind the wall, and I waited. What I did not know, what none of us knew, what turned the whole night from a matter of a stolen box into the thing they would never speak of above a whisper in the corridors of Harrowgate afterward, was asterisk why the box. Why this box this night? I had been guarding the throat of the private wing as though the prize were the dispatch box, 3 ministers' worth of argument sealed in crimson wax. And the box was real and the box did matter, but the box was not the prize. The box was the asterisk errand. The thing Vale could be sent for. The thing Thorn could explain. The cover the whole operation wore so that even if it failed as a clerical irregularity and not as what it truly was. I learned the truth of it only later from Holly's, in the gray of the morning, and I will tell it to you in its place. For now it is enough to say that the dispatch box, that night, contained the draft of an order the Queen meant to sign at dawn, an order that would have ended a long, lucrative, hidden arrangement by which a certain quantity of the realm's affairs had for years been quietly steered through the controller's sloppy office by a hand that profited from the steering. The order named no names. It did not have to. The men it would ruin knew their own names. And one of them had a key to every door in the wing and a voice that could talk a tired sergeant off a threshold. And he had decided that the order must not survive the night to be signed, that the draft must vanish before dawn, so that the Queen, waking, would find only an empty box and a confused office and a sergeant who had assaulted an auditor. And the whole reckoning would dissolve into inquiry and delay, and the kind of careful nothing that men like Thorn live inside the way the river lives under these stones. I did not know that yet. But I knew, watching Edric Thorn walk back to his window seat believing he had won, that whatever was in that box was worth more to him than his honor, his post, and his liberty, because a man does not run an operation like this against the crown. He serves for a clerk's wage or a passing grudge. He runs it because the thing in the box can end him, and he has decided that he would rather end the crown's trust in its own doors than be ended by it. Which meant the box could not merely be asterisk held. It had to be asterisk signed. And it could only be signed by one person, and that person was 30 feet behind me, with a headache, in the small green room, entirely unaware that the most trusted man in her household was sitting in a window seat 10 feet away waiting for her sergeant to break. The first I knew that Holly's had reached the anteroom was that Thorn's hand stopped lifting to the stair. It is a small thing to hang a heart on, but I had been watching that hand in the brass sconce for an hour, and when the small flat asterisk not yet gesture did not come at its appointed minute, I understood that the dark of the stair had emptied, that whoever had been waiting there for the watch's attention to slip had been called off, or had seen something, or had simply felt the temperature of the operation change. And then Thorn rose from the window seat, and this time the courtesy on his face had a hairline crack in it, the first I had seen all night, and he said, "I'm needed elsewhere a moment, Reade. Hold your door." And he went not to the long stair he had come down by, the grand and proper way, but quickly toward the steward's anteroom, toward his prisoner, with the stride of a man who has heard a sound in a part of the house where there should have been no sound. He had every right to go. He was the deputy chamberlain. The anteroom was his to enter. The 2 guards on its door would step aside for him as they would step aside for the Queen. That was the whole horror of it. There was no rule he was breaking by walking into that room. The rules assumed his loyalty the way a house assumes its own foundations, and a man who is himself a foundation can walk anywhere in the house and break nothing until the moment he does. I could not follow. I will say it again because it was the hardest single thing of the night. I could not follow. The door behind me was the post, and the post does not move, and if I left it to chase Thorn to the anteroom, then the dark of the service stair, which had emptied, could fill again in the time it took me to walk away, and the box could go out the way it had nearly come in, and the whole of the long cold night would have been spent guarding an empty threshold while the thing I guarded slipped behind me. The discipline that had held me at the door against the lunge and against the window seat now held me at the door against the most human pull of all, which is the pull to go and stop it with your own hands. I trusted Holly's. I had given her the flare and she had taken it. The anteroom was hers. The door was mine. A house holds because each man holds his own peace and trusts the next man to hold his, and the moment one of them decides his peace matters less than another's and leaves it to help, the whole thing comes down. I had spent 19 years learning to trust the next man. Now I had to do it with my back turned in the dark, on the worst night of my service, against the cleverest man in the palace. And I did it. And standing still while Edric Thorne strode toward my captain was the bravest thing I have ever done, and there is no medal in the world shaped like it. Here is what happened in the anteroom, as Hollis gave it to me later, in the plain flat way she gives everything. She had reached it 3 minutes ahead of Thorne, and she had not gone in. That was the genius of her. A lesser officer, hearing the trouble is the anteroom, would have burst in, confronted the 2 guards, raised the alarm, and shown her whole hand. Hollis did not show her hand. She drew the 2 guards quietly off the inner door on a pretext, a word that the watch was rotating, that they were wanted at the river stair, ordinary, dull, the kind of order a guard obeys without a thought, and she replaced them not with men but with herself and one sergeant she would trust with her life. The 2 of them tucked into the shadow of the steward's plate cupboard where the corridor turned, asterisk out of sight of the anteroom door, so that to any eye the anteroom now stood unguarded. She left the bait open. She made the hole in the house look exactly as wide as Thorne needed it to be. And then she waited, the way I was waiting at the door, the way the whole inner watch had learned to wait from men like the ones who taught us both, and she let the foundation walk into the trap of its own weight. Thorne came. He passed the empty post, saw the guards gone, and I am told the relief on him was a terrible thing to see, the relief of a man whose long bet has finally come good. And he went into the anteroom and shut the door, and Hollis came out of the shadow of the plate cupboard and stood outside it and listened. And what she heard through the door was the deputy chamberlain of Harrowgate Palace saying to a bound prisoner, low and urgent, "Get up. The river stair's clear, the box is still in the green room, we go now you carry, and if it can't be carried it's to be asterisk burned, do you hear me, burned before signing, I don't care what's left in the ash, an empty box buys us the inquiry and the inquiry buys us everything." And then a small wet ugly pause and then Thorne again lower. "And the sergeant. He's seen too much for an inquiry to hold. He has an accident on the river stair tonight. Tonight, Vale. Or you and I both burn instead of the box." That is the sentence that ended Edric Thorne. Not the seal, not the stare, not the eye flick, not my feeling, not my 19 years. His own voice, behind a door he believed unguarded, ordering a man burned and a sergeant killed. Hollis had a recorder running from the moment she left the shadow. Every officer of the inner watch carries one. It is the dullest item on the belt and the one that has saved the most lives. And she had the whole of it, the box, the burning, the river stair, the asterisk accident, in the man's own beautiful courteous voice, with the prisoner's answer under it agreeing to all of it. She did not break the door down even then. She let him finish. She let him hang himself sentence by sentence, because a captain who has waited an hour does not spend the last minute of her patience for the small satisfaction of a kicked-in door. And only when she had it all, only when the recorder held a thing that no clean seal and no silver-haired reasonableness and no friends however many could ever explain away, did she open the anteroom door without haste and say, "Deputy Chamberlain Thorne, Crown Auditor Vale, by the authority of the inner watch and on suspicion of conspiracy against the crown, you are both detained. Hands where I can see them. The house is awake." I knew none of this at the door. I knew only that Thorne had gone toward the anteroom and not come back, and that the dark of the service stair stayed empty, minute after minute, and that somewhere behind me the night had reached its hinge and was turning, and that I could do nothing but hold my piece of it and wait to learn whether the next man had held his. Waiting is its own discipline, and I want to set down here, in the quiet middle of the night before it broke open again, what waiting at a door actually does to a man, because the stories never tell it and it is the truest part. The body, after hours of standing, begins to argue with you. The feet go first, then the small of the back, then a treacherous heaviness behind the eyes that is the most dangerous thing of all, because a tired man does not fall asleep at a post. That is the amateur's fear. A tired man does something far worse. He begins to asterisk simplify. The mind, to spare itself, starts shaving the edges off the world. The seal that was too clean becomes, in the small hours, just a seal. The eye flick becomes just a glance. The whole structure of careful wrongness you built so patiently at 1:40 in the morning starts by 4 to look like the elaborate invention of a man who wanted there to be a conspiracy, because a conspiracy is more bearable than a long, boring, cold night of nothing. That is the real enemy at a quiet post, not the lunge, the simplifying. And the only defense against it I have ever found is to refuse to read aside. I had decided at the door, when the man's eyes went past me to the thing he had not given up on. I had decided, and a decision made in the clear, cold moment is worth more than 100 rethinkings in the tired hours, and the whole of my craft in those waiting minutes was to keep faith with the man I had been at 1:40, who had seen clearly, against the man I was becoming at 4, who wanted only to lie down and let the world be simple. I thought about the corporal at the checkpoint, the kind, tired man who had simplified, who had looked at the good car with the good papers and the reasonable, urgent story, and let the edges come off it because it was late and he wanted to go home. He had not been a coward. That is what the stories get wrong. He had been tired, and tiredness had simplified the world for him, and the simple world had a sick mother in it, and a waiting dignitary and 100 reasonable things, and the simple world was a lie, and the lie cost more than I can say. I had carried that corporal in me for 30 years, not as a warning about other men, but as a warning about myself, because I am made of the same stuff he was, and on the same long night I would feel the same pull toward the same mercy, and the only thing that has ever made me different from him is that I have refused, every single time, to let the late hours reopen a thing the clear hour closed. So I stood, I let my feet hurt, I let the heaviness sit behind my eyes, and I did not bargain with it. I kept faith with the man at 1:40. And the river ran under the stones, and somewhere behind me my captain was reaching an anteroom on the strength of a wrong number I had trusted her to hear, and I held the door not because I was certain. I have told you, certainty was never the job, but because I had decided, and a man who will not read aside in the tired hours is the only kind of man a door can be trusted to. I knew none of what was happening behind me. I only held and waited and kept faith. The river ran under the stones. The string ensemble 3 corridors off had stopped at last. The reception was thinning toward its end. And then, when I had almost let myself believe the worst was over, the service stair filled again. Not with the light, quick step of the watcher who had hung back in the dark. With a slow, deliberate, confident tread, 2 sets of feet, and a voice that came up ahead of the men who carried it, smooth and unhurried and entirely at ease, saying, "Stand easy, Sergeant. We're the relief." 2 men came up out of the dark of the southern service stair into the lamplight of the cold gallery, and they were dressed as inner watch guards, in the dark tunics of the night detail, with the right belts and the right boots and the right unhurried bearing, and the man in front held up, at my eye level, the way Vale had held up his credentials 6 hours before, a watch order, a rotation slip, the ordinary paper by which one detail relieves another at a post, and it bore Captain Hollies' signature. Or a thing so like it that I, who have seen Hollies' signature 1,000 times, felt my certainty stagger. "Relief for the gallery door," the man said. "Sergeant Reade, you're stood down. Captain's compliments. You've had a long watch and there's questions for you upstairs about the auditor. We'll take the door." He smiled, and it was a good smile, a watchroom smile, the smile of a colleague at the end of a hard shift, and he stepped forward to take my post as 100 reliefs had stepped forward to take it across 19 years, the most ordinary transaction in the house, the changing of a guard. It was the most dangerous moment of the entire night, and it nearly worked, and I will tell you exactly why. Everything in me was *tired. That is the thing they do not put in the stories. 6 hours at a cold post, the long fight against the window seat, the strain of the salted radio call, the bravery of standing still while my captain walked into danger I had sent her toward. All of it had spent me down to the last coin in the purse, And here was a man in the right uniform with the right paper offering me the one thing my whole body wanted, which was to be relieved to be done, to hand the door to a colleague and go and sit down, and let wiser heads carry it from here. Let wiser heads carry it from here. That was Thorne's own phrase, come back to me out of the window seat, and it was the recognition of the phrase that saved me, because a true relief does not arrive quoting the man you have spent the night refusing. I looked at the paper. I did not take it. I never take the paper. A paper is a thing a man holds to make you look at it instead of at him, and I had learned that lesson at a checkpoint long ago. I looked at the man, and I asked him the one question that no forged paper in the world can answer, the question that is the true credential of every man who has ever stood the inner watch, the question we ask each other in the dark when we cannot see the face. I gave him the night's word. Every watch has a word. It changes with the watch. It is given at the head of the stair when you come on. It is never written down. It lives only in the heads of the men actually standing the line that night. And it is the one thing a man slid in from outside through a hole in the house, even a hole as wide as a deputy chamberlain, cannot have, because Thorne could forge a signature and steal a uniform and copy a seal, but he could not be at the head of the stair at the changing of the watch and hear the word given man to man. I said the first half of the night's word, lo, the way you do, and I waited for the man to give me the second half. He didn't have it. He was good. I will give the whole operation that, from the seal to the salted signature to the watchroom smile, it was the work of people who understood this house far too well. But he did not have the word, and in the half-second of nothing where the second half should have come, I saw him reach for the bluff, saw him decide to brazen it, saw the watchroom smile widen into something that was not a colleague's smile at all, and I had already moved. I did not let him reach the door. I will not pretend it was bloodless this time. Two men, fresh in the right boots, with one purpose, against one tired sergeant in a stone gallery, that is not the clean turn of a wrist that took veil. But it was still not a brawl, and there was still a child asleep 40 feet beyond the threshold, and the whole of my training bent toward the one thing that mattered, which was not to win prettily but to not lose the door, not for 1 second, not by 1 foot. I put the lead man into the doorframe I had stood in front of all night, used his own forward weight, the same lesson, the only lesson, and I got the whistle to my mouth as I did it and blew it, one long blast, the oldest alarm in the house, older than the radio, the sound that means come, all of you, now here, and I called the color at last, the color I had spent 6 hours not calling. Because the time for amber was over, and the box was 30 feet behind me, and 2 men had come for my door and my life under a forged relief. Red at the throat, I roared into the radio, no discipline in it now and no need for any, the whole house allowed to hear, the whole house meant to hear. Red at the throat, gallery door breached, all posts, and Harrowgate Palace, the great closing fist I had told you about at the start, the thing I am only the visible knuckle of, asterisk closed. You have to understand what asterisk red at the throat sets in motion, because the whole point of 19 years standing still at quiet doors is that, in the 1 minute you finally need it, the stillness turns into the fastest thing in the world. The radio carried my voice to every post in the wing, and every post relayed it outward and upward in the same half-breath, and what followed was not chaos. Chaos is what Thorne had counted on, the stampede, the 400 guests, the panic that swallows a quiet theft. What followed was the opposite of chaos. It was a house that had drilled this in the cold gray hours of 10,000 uneventful nights, moving all at once, each man to his named place, the way the muscles of one body move to catch a fall before the mind has finished being afraid. The 2 posts at the head of the long stair came down at 3 at a time. The river stair detail, real men, with the night's word, sealed the southern service stair behind the 2 forged reliefs, so that the dark mouth they had come up out of was now a closed sack with no bottom. The stateroom watch, 3 corridors off, did not come running and frighten the last of the guests. They closed the great doors between the public rooms and the private wing as gently as drawing a curtain, so that the 400 drifted out into the summer night believing the midsummer reception had ended exactly as every midsummer reception ends, knowing nothing, which is its own kind of victory and the kind my trade values most. And from above, from the roof, from the gatehouse, from the courtyard where the duty section stands its vehicles through every night of the year against exactly this, came the heavier tread, the section that does not wear ceremony, the men in plain dark kit who exist for the word *red, and they came down into the cold gallery in a flood of disciplined speed that turned the long cold hours of my solitude, in the space of 90 seconds, into a crowd. The lead man I had put into the door frame did not get up. The second one tried the only thing left to a man whose sack has no bottom. He turned and ran for the dark of the service stair, straight into the river stair detail coming the other way, and they took him without a shot and without a blow worth the name, 3 men folding one man down onto the cold flags as routinely as closing a gate. It was over, at my door, in under 2 minutes from the whistle. The threat that had worn 6 hours of beautiful patience and 3 uniforms and a deputy chamberlain's protection collapsed. In the end, the way every such threat collapses once the house decides to stop being polite, all at once, and from every direction, and with the particular completeness of a thing that was only ever held up by the belief that no one would close the doors. And then the gallery went still in a new way, a crowded stillness, 20 men of the watch where for 6 hours there had been only me and the river, and through them, unhurried even now, came Captain Hollies, and behind Hollies, bound and no longer beautiful, walked Edric Thorne. She had brought him to me on purpose. I understood that at once. She could have taken him out by the long stair and spared us both the meeting. She brought him down the gallery instead, past the door he had spent the night trying to open, and she stopped him in front of me, the sergeant he had ordered to have an accident on the river stair, and she said to him, in the flat, plain voice that had carried us through the whole of it, "I want you to see who held it." Thorne looked at me. The courtesy was gone, finally and entirely, and what was under it was not the workman I had glimpsed in Vale, and not the foundation that had walked through the house breaking nothing. It was a small, frightened, clever man who had wagered the trust of a kingdom that one tired sergeant could be talked, charmed, threatened, relieved, or killed off a threshold, and had lost the wager and knew it, and knew exactly how completely. He did not bluster. To the very end he was too clever to bluster. He said only, in a voice with all the music wrung out of it, "It was a clean seal, Reade. It was a perfect seal." "I know, sir," I said. "That was the trouble with it. And that, though there was a great deal still to do, the box to secure and the Queen to wake and the long gray morning of statements and verifications to get through, that was the end of Edric Thorne, spoken in the cold throat of the wing he had betrayed, 10 feet from the door he could not open, by a man he had decided was furniture. They took him out. They took Vale and the 2 false reliefs out behind him. The recorder in Hollies's pocket held the box and the burning and the river stair and the accident in his own voice, and there is no clean seal and no silver hair and no 30 years of trust that can talk a man out of his own voice ordering a killing behind a door he believed unguarded. The friends he had promised would be extremely interested never came. Friends like that are only ever friends to a man who is winning. By the time the sky over the courtyard had begun to go from black to the color of old iron, the most trusted man in Harrowgate Palace was sitting in the same kind of small room he had meant for me, and the thing in the dispatch box was exactly where it had been at 1:40 in the morning, 30 feet behind my door, sealed, real, and waiting to be signed. I did not leave the post even then. Hollies told me to stand down. She told me twice, and I told her, with all the respect in the world, that I would hold the gallery door until I was relieved by a man who could give me the second half of the night's word, and not 1 minute before, because I had learned that very night what a forged relief looks like, and I was not going to be the fool who handed the throat of the private wing to a smile and a paper after holding it against everything else. Hollis looked at me for a moment, and then, "This is the only time in 19 years I have seen her do it." She smiled. A small, tired, real smile, and she said the second half of the word herself. And only then did I come off the post, 6.5 hours after I had taken it, into the iron-gray light, into a gallery full of the men of my own house, to learn at last what the box had really been for, and what the Queen would do about the door that did not move. The controller, it turned out, was not unwell. Thorne had said he was unwell to keep me from the one clean proof that would have ended the matter at 3 in the morning. In fact, the controller was at home asleep and entirely innocent, an old man who ran a sloppy office and had never sent a Crown Auditor named Corwin Vale anywhere in his life, because there was no such post as Crown Auditor, and never had been. Thorne had invented the title precisely because it sounded grand and obscure enough that no one would think to check it. The way the best lies are not the ones nobody has heard, but the ones nobody bothers to confirm. When Hollis woke the controller at dawn and put the question to him plainly, the old man's bafflement was its own kind of evidence, and within the hour every thread of Thorne's beautiful story had come apart in daylight exactly as I had promised the deputy chamberlain it would in the cold. "But the box, you have waited for the box, and so had I." Hollis took me, at the Queen's own order once Her Majesty was woken and told, into the small green room, where the dispatch box still sat on the writing table under its real seal, untouched, 30 feet from the door it had spent the night trying to leave by. And Queen Saraland herself broke the seal in front of us. Not a clerk, not Hollis, the Queen, because she said the door had been held by her own people through her own night, and her own people would see what they had held, and she lifted out the draft I have already told you of, the order that would have ended the long-hidden arrangement, the order Thorne had been willing to murder to keep from her pen. I will not pretend I understood all the machinery of it then or now. It is the business of ministers and not of sergeants, and a wise sergeant keeps it that way. But the shape of it was plain enough. For the better part of a decade, a quantity of the realm's quieter affairs, contracts, appointments, the small daily steering of a kingdom that never makes the broadsheets, had been moving through the sloppiness of the controller's office in a way that profited certain men, and the chief of those certain men, the one who had built the channel and kept it oiled and made sure the office stayed exactly sloppy enough to hide it, was the man best placed in the whole household to do so. The deputy chamberlain, who touched every paper and was suspected by none, because he was a foundation, and foundations are not examined. The Queen had come to suspect it slowly, the way a careful monarch comes to suspect a trusted man, not from one betrayal but from 100 small wrongnesses that, like a picture hung a degree off level, had nagged at her across the years until she understood what she was looking at. And she had done the thing a good queen does. She had not accused. She had not raised a scandal that would shake the realm's faith in its own household. She had quietly drafted an order to close the channel, to reform the office, to put the quiet affairs into clean hands and open books, an order that named no one and ruined no one publicly, but that would, the moment it was signed, end Thorne's hidden trade forever and leave him nothing but the choice to go quietly or be found. He had chosen neither. He had chosen the box. He thought, the Queen said, turning the draft in her hands in the gray morning light, and her voice was very tired and very steady, that if the order vanished before I signed it, I would doubt myself, that I would think I had imagined the need for it, that the inquiry into how a sealed box went missing from my own wing would swallow a year, and that at the end of the year there would be no order, no proof, and a household too shaken by the scandal of the theft to look any further. He thought the door was the weak point. She looked up at me. He was nearly right about everything. He was wrong about the door. I did not know what to say to a queen, so I said the only true thing I had. The door held because the house held, Your Majesty. I stood it. But I'd have lost it 3 times over without the captain, and without the men who closed the stairs, and without the man who taught me the knight's word 40 years before I needed it. I'm the part you can see. I'm not the part that held." She did not answer that at once. She set the draft down on the writing table, and she took up a pen, the same pen, I suppose, she would have used at dawn before any of it happened. And she signed the order then and there, in front of Holly's and in front of me, at 6 in the morning, with the iron light coming gray through the green room's windows, the ink going down in the long, sure strokes of a hand that had decided. And when it was done, she pressed her own seal into the wax, the real seal, the Queen's own, worn soft at the edges from 100 doors a week, the kind of seal a forger can never quite make because it carries the wear of true use. And I thought of Vale's perfect, unworn, untrue seal in the lamplight 6 hours before, and I understood that the whole night had turned, in the end, on the difference between a thing that is used and a thing that is only made to look used. Between a foundation that bears weight and one that merely calls itself a foundation, and that telling those two apart, in the cold, in the dark, against charm and threat and the longing to sit down, was the entire and only craft of my life. "Now it cannot vanish," the Queen said quietly, of the signed and sealed order. "Now it is done, and his last reason to have done any of this is gone, and the realm will be a little cleaner for it and will never need to know how nearly it wasn't." She looked at the order a moment longer. Then she looked at me, and she said a thing I have carried every day since. "Do you know what he could not understand, Sergeant, what men like him never understand all their clever lives? He thought a guard at a door is a asterisk cost, a formality. A thing you keep because it has always been kept, that any clever man can talk past on a clever enough night. He never once understood that the door is not the formality. The door is the asterisk promise. It is the kingdom's promise to itself that some things will be held even when no one is watching, even when the man holding them is tired, even when the order to stand down comes wrapped in a friend's voice and a captain's signature. The whole of a realm's safety is only ever the sum of how many of its doors are held by men who will not move them for a story. You held the promise. That is worth more than the box. I have been given, in 19 years, exactly one thing I value more than her words that morning, and I will come to it. But I want you to have the words first, because they are the truest account of my trade I have ever heard, and they were spoken by a queen at dawn over a signed order, to a tired man who had not yet been allowed to sit down. The morning was long, as I had told Thorne it would be. There were statements, mine 3 times over, to 3 sets of clerks, each going over the night minute by minute, the kitchens, the seal, the eye flick, the salted radio call, the night's word. And there were the verifications, the seals taken away under glass and confirmed forged within the hour exactly as Holly's had promised they would be. And there was the slow, careful unwinding of the rest of the operation, which had had more hands in it than I have told you. Because an operation that puts forged reliefs into a palace and turns a deputy chamberlain is not the work of 3 men in gray coats. But that unwinding belongs to the ministers and the law, and a sergeant does not tell tales out of school. It is enough to say that the channel was closed, that the men who had grown fat on the realm's sloppiness were found one by one in the weeks that followed by people far above my pay, and that none of it would have happened, the signed order, the closed channel, the clean books, if a box had gone out a service stair at 1:40 in the morning, while a tired man let a beautiful story move a door. Here is what became of the others, since you have come this far and a story owes you its loose ends. Corwin Vale, the man in the silver-gray coat, talked. Of course he talked. He was a workman, and a workman on a contract talks the moment the contract can no longer protect him, and he gave up Thorne and the channel and the forgers, and the 2 false reliefs in exchange for the difference between one kind of long sentence and another. I bear him no particular ill will. He was the instrument, not the hand. The last I saw of him, he was a smaller man than the one who had rapped his knuckles on my tunic, and I have noticed across 19 years that the men who treat a guard as furniture are always, underneath, the most frightened men in any room, and that the charm is the fright wearing a good coat. The 2 who came up the stair under the forged relief were not watchmen at all. not even false ones. They were men hired for the one task of taking a door from a tired sergeant by whatever the night required, and the river stair accident that Thorne had ordered for me would have been theirs to arrange. I think about that less than you might expect. A man cannot stand doors for 19 years and spend his nights counting the times the door was the only thing between him and a worse morning. You hold the door and you do not count, and you go home, and the not counting is part of the discipline too. Edric Thorne never stood in a public dock. The realm could not have borne it. The shaking of faith that the Queen had spent the whole affair preventing would have come anyway if the household's most trusted man had been paraded as its worst, and Her Majesty judged, rightly I think, that the realm was owed the quiet justice and not the loud scandal. So it was done the way such things are done, quietly, completely, and without a headline, the foundation pulled out and replaced before the house could feel the draft. He is alive, somewhere, in the small gray life of a clever man who wagered everything on the belief that no door is truly held and lost. I do not pity him. But I will tell you that I think of his last words to me more often than I think of any blow I ever struck or took, because they were almost wisdom. It was a perfect seal. And the only thing that kept them from being wisdom was that he had spent his whole life learning to make the seal perfect, and never once learning that the where is the point, that a true thing is true because it has borne weight, that you cannot forge the years. In Captain Holly's, I have not done her justice, and I cannot, in the space a story leaves at its end, do justice to the officer who heard a wrong number in a tired post-check and turned it into a recorder running outside an anteroom door. She was made up after it. She would tell you it was nothing, that she only did the watch's work, and that is exactly the answer that proves she deserved it. We do not speak of that night, she and I, beyond the once. But there is a thing the inner watch does now, at the changing of every watch in the private wing, that we did not do before, and it is her doing. The night's word is given man to man at the head of the stair as it always was, but now, at the gallery door, the relief and the man relieved exchange both halves, each giving one, so that no smile and no paper can ever again stand a man down from the throat of the wing without the word that cannot be forged. They call it, in the watchroom, Reade's relief, though it was Holly's who made the rule and the whole craft of the house that earned it, and I have asked them twice to call it something else and twice been ignored, which is the watch's way of telling a man he is loved. There was, 2 days after, a thing done in the hall of the inner watch that I should set down, because it is the part the household would call the honor, even though it is not the part I value most. Prince Consort Aldrich came down to the watchroom himself. He is not a man who comes to the watchroom. The royal household and the men who guard it move in separate weathers by long custom, the guarded above and the guarding below, and a prince in the watchroom is as rare as snow in the green room. But he came, in the plain dark coat he wears when he is being a father and not a figure, and he had with him a thing in a small case, and he stood in front of the whole assembled watch, Holly's and Aldous, and the river stair detail, and the men who had closed the great doors so gently that 400 guests went home knowing nothing, and he spoke about the night. He did not speak about me first. That is why I have always thought well of him. He spoke about the Asterisk house first, about the men who had closed the stairs, the captain who had heard a wrong number, the whole disciplined fist that had closed on the dark without a single guest the wiser, because he understood, as the Queen understood, that the door I held was only the visible end of a thing made of many hands, and that to honor the knuckle while forgetting the fist is to misunderstand the whole of it. And only then, when the house had been honored, did he turn to me. "Sergeant Reade," he said, "my children sleep behind the door you held. I am told you were offered your relief that night by a forged paper and a friendly smile, and that you asked for a word instead, and held when the word did not come. I am told you were by then in your 6th cold hour, and that there was an order, a real order in a real friend's voice, that you stand down, and that you did not. I have spent my life among people who explain, very persuasively, why the rules should bend for them this once. You are the first man I have met who made me grateful, in my own house, for a man who would not bend them even for a prince's chamberlain, especially asterisk for a prince's chamberlain. And here he did a thing I did not expect and have never quite found the words for. He took from the small case not a medal struck for the occasion. There had been no time, and besides, he said, a struck medal is a thing the smith makes, and he wanted to give a thing that had borne weight but his own. One of his own, an old one, worn soft at the ribbon's edge, the kind of decoration a man earns young and keeps for a life, and he unpinned it from where he must have carried it on the dark coat for exactly this, and he pinned it to my tunic himself, and his hands were not quite steady doing it, because he was thinking, I knew, of the door, and of who sleeps on the other side of it. It is worn, he said when it was done. I am told you have views, Sergeant, on the difference between a thing that is worn and a thing that is only made to look so. I thought you should have the worn one. I did not have words for a prince any more than I had had for a queen. I came to attention, which is the only language I am truly fluent in, and I held it, and he returned it, prince to sergeant, in front of the whole watch, and that, the worn medal given by the father of the children behind the door, is what the household would tell you was the honor of it. And it was. I keep that one too in the same drawer, wrapped in the same tissue. But I have already told you it is not the one I value most, and I am a man who keeps his word, so I will tell you the one I do. So, the one thing I value more than the Queen's words, and more than the Prince Consort's own worn medal pinned, by his own unsteady hand. It came 3 days later, when the statements were done, and the household had settled, and the midsummer roses were already going over in the courtyard. I was back at the gallery door I had asked to be. A man wants his own post back after a thing like that, the way you want to ride the horse that threw you. And it was an ordinary afternoon, quiet, the river cold under the stones, the book at the head of the stair full of nothing but the lawful comings and goings of a peaceful house. And down the cold gallery from the private wing, not up the service stair, came 2 small figures and a nurse keeping a careful distance behind them. And they stopped in front of me, and the smaller of the 2, the Princess Malin, who is about 8 and was at that time missing a front tooth, looked up the whole long height of me to my face, which does not move, and said, with the tremendous seriousness of the very young, "Are you the one who stood at our door all night?" "I am, Your Highness," I said. She considered this. Behind her, the prince, who is 10 and trying hard to be grave about everything the way 10-year-olds do, watched to see what his sister would make of me. And then the princess held up her hand, and in it was a small thing she had clearly made herself, badly and with enormous care, out of folded paper and a length of the crimson ribbon the household uses. A medal, a child's medal, the ribbon creased where small fingers had not got the fold quite right, the paper star at the end of it lopsided and gummed and entirely perfect. "Mother has medals to give," she said, "but I wanted to give you one too because you stood at our door and I sleep on the other side of it." And she could not reach my chest, so I broke protocol. I, who had held a door all night against the breaking of it, broke it gladly for this. And I knelt down on the cold flags of the cold gallery in my red tunic, and let an 8-year-old pin a lopsided paper star to the breast of it with great concentration and a pin that went, I will not lie to you, slightly into me, and I did not move, because I am good at not moving, and because there was nothing in the world I wanted to move from less. That is the one thing I value more than the Queen's words. I have it still. It is in a drawer at home, wrapped in tissue, the ribbon faded now and the paper gone soft, and on the nights I cannot sleep there are some. A man does not stand a night like that without some. I take it out and I hold it, and I think about the difference between a thing that is made to look like an honor and a thing that is an honor because of the weight it has borne, and I think about a small voice saying I sleep on the other side of it, and I understand, the way Thorn never could and never will, exactly what I held that night, and exactly why no story in the world was ever going to move it. People ask me when they hear some part of this, and only some part of it is ever told, The rest belongs to the house. How I knew. How I knew at 1:40 in the morning, with a perfect seal and a perfect coat in front of me, that the man was wrong. And I tell them the truth, which disappoints them because they want a trick and there is no trick. I tell them I did not know. I tell them that knowing was never my job, that the door does not ask to be sure, it asks only to be held, that a guard who waits for certainty before he holds has already lost, because certainty comes at dawn and the box goes out at 1:40. I tell them that I did not hold the door because I knew Vale was a thief. I held it because the door is the promise, and the promise is held whether the man at it is a thief or a tired clerk, and that the whole genius of my trade, if it has one, is that you treat every story the same, the true and the false alike, and you give every man the same level warning, and you move for none of them, because the day you start deciding which beautiful stories deserve an open door is the day the door is already open. Step back from the door, I tell them I said that night, and I said it once, the way I have learned to say the things that matter level low without heat. And I tell them that everything else, the house closing like a fist, the captain at the anteroom, the queen's pen at dawn, the lopsided paper star, everything else followed from that one quiet sentence, and the fact that when the man would not step back, I did not either. That is the whole of it. That is what happened the night a man with a perfect seal tried to carry a kingdom's promise out a service stair, and found a tired sergeant at a cold door who would give him one final warning and not 1 inch more. He pushed it, and the door held because the house held, because the door is the promise, and the promise on that night, in that throat of stone above the running river, did not move. I am back at my post now. The river is cold under the stones. The book is full of nothing but lawful things. And if you come down the cold gallery some night toward the private wing with a beautiful story and a perfect seal, I will look at you, and not at your paper, and I will tell you once, level and low and without heat, to step back from the door. For your sake, I hope you do.